When we think of ancient empires, what comes to mind? The grandeur of Rome, the wisdom of Greece, the pyramids of Egypt. We see powerful magnificent armies, and cultures that shape the world. History books are filled with their victories, their innovations, and their breathtaking monuments that defy time. These stories paint a picture of greatness, of civilization marching forward, of progress. But this is only one side of the story. It's the highlight reel, carefully edited over centuries. What if I told you that behind every celebrated monument, there's a story of suffering? Behind every great emperor, there are millions of forgotten lives. The truth is, ancient empires weren't just built on genius and ambition. They were built on domination, exploitation, and fear. The very foundations of these glorious civilizations were cemented with the sweat and blood of ordinary people who had no say in their own destinies. For every conqueror immortalized in stone, countless families were torn apart. For every golden palace, thousands labored in brutal conditions, their humanity stripped away for the sake of an emperor's legacy. This darker reality is often pushed to the margins of history. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. It challenges our romanticized view of the past. It forces us to confront the fact that progress and pain often go hand in hand. The splendor of the Roman Colosseum is undeniable, but so is the brutality of the gladiatorial games held within its walls. The Great Wall of China is a marvel of engineering, but it's also a massive graveyard for the forced laborers who died building it. These weren't just empires of progress, they were systems of control, built on a strict hierarchy where obedience was valued far more than individual life. Let's dig deeper. The wealth that funded these empires often came from ruthless conquest. Entire cities were plundered, their people enslaved or executed. Farmers had their lands taken, forced to give up most of their harvest as tribute, leaving their own families to starve. This wasn't just a byproduct of war. It was the engine of the imperial economy. The system was designed to funnel resources from the conquered territories and the lower classes to the elite at the top. The common person wasn't a citizen in the way we think of it today. They were a resource to be used. So, why is it important to talk about this? It's not to diminish the achievements of our ancestors. The art, philosophy, and science that emerged from these civilizations are truly remarkable. But to fully understand history, we must see it in its entirety: the good, the bad, and the ugly. By acknowledging the cost of empire, we get a more honest and complete picture of the past. We start to see that history isn't just about kings and generals. It's about the countless, nameless individuals whose lives were the price of greatness. Their stories are rarely told, but they are just as much a part of history as the emperors who ruled them. Understanding this hidden reality helps us ask better questions about our own world. What are the hidden costs of our own progress? Who is paying the price for the systems we live in today? History isn't just a collection of stories about the past. It's a mirror that reflects our present. By exploring the dark side of ancient empires, we're not just correcting the historical record. We're learning a crucial lesson about power, justice, and humanity that is as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. The greatness of an empire was often built on a foundation of pain, a truth that history too often forgets. The first topic of our discussion is absolute power. Have you ever wondered what it was really like to live in an ancient empire? Forget about elections or human rights. At the very heart of every great empire, from Rome to Egypt, was one single, defining feature: absolute power. Kings, emperors, and pharaohs wielded authority that flowed in only one direction from the top, all the way down. There were no constitutions, no independent courts, and certainly no voting booths to limit a ruler's control. In these societies, the ruler's word was literally the law. So, how did they get away with it? How did one person convince millions to obey without question? The answer was simple, yet brilliant. They used religion. Rulers weren't just presented as skilled politicians or generals. They were portrayed as something more. They were the chosen ones, handpicked by the gods, or in some cases, they were considered gods themselves, walking among mortals. Think about the Egyptian pharaohs, who weren't just kings. They were living deities. This belief system was an incredibly powerful tool. It transformed political obedience into a sacred, moral duty. To challenge the ruler wasn't just treason, it was blasphemy. It was a sin against the divine order of the universe. This deep connection between power and faith made any form of resistance not just dangerous, but almost unthinkable for the average person. From the moment they were born, people were taught that the stability of their world depended entirely on their obedience to the ruler. The highest virtue wasn't justice or fairness, it was order. As long as the empire was strong and protected from its enemies, the suffering of individuals was often seen as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. The well-being of the state came before the well-being of its citizens. This mindset allowed rulers to make monumental decisions without any input from the people they affected. A single emperor could decide to declare a war that would cost thousands of lives, raise taxes that would plunge families into poverty, or demand forced labor for massive construction projects, all with a single command. There was no expectation that a ruler should have to explain or justify these decisions. Their authority existed simply because it did. It was an accepted fact of life. Of course, not everyone was on the same level. The elite class of nobles, top military commanders, and high-ranking priests thrived under this system. They enjoyed immense privileges that shielded them from the harsh realities faced by ordinary people. The law was a flexible thing, applied very differently depending on your social status. A crime that might lead to a brutal punishment for a farmer could be easily forgiven or overlooked for a nobleman. Justice wasn't blind. It was selective, and it always favored the powerful. This created a society built on a foundation of fear and deep-seated inequality. Corruption was rampant. With no one to hold them accountable, officials could easily abuse their power for personal gain, knowing they were protected by the very structure of the empire. For the common person, there was no legal path to challenge unfair treatment. Complaining could get you punished, or worse. But this system wasn't some historical accident. It was designed this way on purpose. Absolute power was seen as essential for building and maintaining a vast empire. Ruling over huge territories with diverse populations required strict, centralized control. From the perspective of an emperor, inspiring fear and demanding obedience were far more reliable methods for keeping order than trying to earn trust and cooperation. It was a pragmatic, if ruthless, approach to governance. The goal was to unify millions of people under a single authority, and absolute power was the most effective tool for the job. You could build pyramids, conquer new lands, and create incredible works of art, all through the sheer force of will of one person. However, we can't ignore the dark side of this structure. The immense human cost is the part of the story that often gets left out of the grand tales of imperial glory. Ancient empires were stable not because their people were happy and prosperous, but because they were controlled. Loyalty was not earned through good leadership. It was enforced through fear and the constant threat of punishment. People were silent not because they had nothing to say, but because speaking out was too dangerous. Freedom was replaced with obedience, and for many, life was a matter of survival, not dignity. This is the tragic paradox of absolute power. When a ruler has no limits, when they are not accountable to anyone, they can lose touch with the humanity of their people. Empathy becomes a luxury they can't afford, or one they simply choose to ignore. The great monuments and legacies of these ancient empires are truly owned, but it is crucial to remember that they were built on the backs of millions who had no voice and no choice but to obey. That is the true, and often brutal, legacy of absolute power. The second topic of our discussion is life of the masses. We often marvel at the grandeur of ancient empires, the magnificent pyramids, the sprawling Great Wall, the majestic Colosseum. We hear tales of powerful emperors, brilliant generals, and wealthy elites who lived in unimaginable luxury. But what about everyone else? What was life like for the 99% of the population who weren't emperors or aristocrats? Today, we're pulling back the curtain of history to reveal the darker, more difficult reality for the ordinary people of ancient empires. Their stories, often untold, are the true foundation upon which these great civilizations were built. For the vast majority, life was a cycle of relentless hard work. Most people were farmers, tied to the land and the seasons. Their days began before sunrise and ended long after sunset, spent toiling in the fields to grow the food that fed the entire empire, including its massive armies and burgeoning cities. Others were laborers and craftsmen, quarrying stone, hauling heavy loads, or working in workshops to create the goods that fueled the economy. Their sweat and effort built the monuments we still admire today, yet they received very little in return. Their survival was a constant gamble, dependent on the weather, the success of the harvest, and the ever-present demands of the statal factors completely beyond their control. A drought, a flood, or a blight could mean starvation for their families. One of the heaviest burdens on the common person was taxation. Empires were expensive, maintaining vast armies, funding monumental construction projects, and supporting the lavish lifestyles of the ruling class required immense resources, and who paid for it all? The common people. Taxes weren't just collected in coin. More often, they were paid in kind a portion of a farmer's crop, a craftsman's goods, or even labor itself. This system, known as a corvée, meant that men could be summoned at any time to work on state projects, leaving their own farms and families to struggle. The tax collectors were relentless, and failure to meet the quotas could have devastating consequences, including the loss of your land, being forced into debt bondage, or severe physical punishment. It was a system designed to extract as much as possible, with little regard for the well-being of those who produced everything. Living conditions were a world away from the palaces and villas of the elite. Most ordinary people lived in small, cramped houses, often just a single room shared by an entire family. These homes were typically made of mud brick or wood, with dirt floors and little to no ventilation. Sanitation was a major problem. There were no sewer systems in the crowded residential areas, and waste was often just thrown into the streets. This created a breeding ground for diseases like cholera and typhoid. With limited medical knowledge and access to care, even a simple infection or a minor illness could quickly become a death sentence. It's no surprise that life expectancy was tragically low, often hovering around 30 to 35 years. Infant and child mortality rates were staggeringly high, and for many families, simply surviving was a daily victory. In this environment, education was an unimaginable luxury. The skills of reading and writing were keys to power, and they were fiercely guarded by the elites and the priestly classes. Keeping the masses illiterate was a deliberate strategy. An uneducated population was easier to control, less likely to question authority, and more accepting of their predetermined lot in life. Children were not sent to school to learn philosophy or history. Instead, they began working from a very young age. They helped in the fields, tended to animals, or learned a family trade, contributing to the household's survival. This lack of education trapped families in a cycle of poverty and powerlessness, reinforcing the rigid social hierarchy that defined the empire, and that hierarchy was nearly impossible to escape. Social mobility was practically non-existent. Your fate was sealed the moment you were born. If your father was a farmer, you would be a farmer. If your mother was a weaver, you would likely become a weaver. The social order was seen as natural and divinely ordained. This rigid class structure provided stability for the empire, ensuring a constant supply of laborers and soldiers. But for the individual, it meant a life without hope for advancement, a life where your potential was limited, not by your talent or ambition, but by the circumstances of your birth. The empire depended on this permanent inequality to function. We look at the great pyramids, temples, and walls as symbols of imperial power and achievement. But they are also monuments to human toil and suffering. These incredible feats of engineering were built on the backs of countless workers. Men were conscripted for years, forced to perform grueling, dangerous labor under the watchful eyes of strict overseers. They worked in the blistering sun or the freezing cold, quarrying massive stones, dragging them for miles, and hoisting them into place with nothing but ropes, ramps, and sheer muscle power. Accidents were frequent, injuries were common, and exhaustion was a constant companion. A worker's life was considered expendable. If someone was injured or died, there were always more to take their place. The grand vision of the emperor always outweighed the value of an individual life. When crisis struck, it was always the poor who suffered most. During times of food shortages and famines, the elites had their granaries and stored resources to fall back on. They were insulated from the worst of the disaster. But for ordinary families who lived hand-to-mouth, a failed harvest meant immediate hunger and desperation. The state's priority was not to distribute food to the starving mass, but to ensure its armies were fed, and public order was maintained, often through force. The cries of the hungry were often met with silence or suppression. For the empire, stability was more important than compassion. Given these incredible hardships, you might wonder why there weren't more rebellions. The truth is, open revolt was incredibly risky and rarely successful. The state held a monopoly on organized violence, and any uprising was met with brutal force. But beyond the fear of punishment, there were other powerful forces at play. Tradition, religion, and a deep-seated belief in the established order kept most people in their place. For many, suffering was just a normal, unavoidable part of life. It was the way things had always been, and they lacked the education, resources, and sense of shared identity needed to imagine a different world. The empire's survival depended on this quiet, resigned acceptance. So when we look back at the glory of ancient empires, it's crucial to remember the full story. Behind every celebrated victory and every magnificent monument lied the silent struggles of millions. Their lives were not a footnote to history. They were the engine that drove it. The greatness of these empires was not built on the prosperity of their people, but on their endurance. The dark reality is that the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. The suffering of the masses wasn't a failure of the empire, it was the price of its existence. Thank you for watching. The third topic of our discussion is ruled by fear. Have you ever wondered how ancient empires controlled millions of people across vast lands? It wasn't just with armies and walls. It was with something far more powerful, something invisible. Fear. Fear wasn't just a side effect of their rule, it was the very system they built. Rulers, from the Romans to the Mongols, understood that to command obedience from so many, you had to control not just their bodies, but their minds. And fear was the most effective tool in their arsenal. So how did they do it? Let's start with the law. The legal codes of ancient empires were masterpieces of psychological warfare. They weren't designed for fairness or justice in the way we think of it today. Their primary purpose was to protect the authority of the state. Laws were intentionally harsh and the punishments severe. You weren't just fined for breaking a rule. You could be subjected to brutal, public punishments. Survival depended on obedience, and the price of disobedience was made terrifyingly clear. This brings us to the second pillar of this system: public enforcement. Punishments weren't carried out in secret, hidden away in some dark dungeon. No, they were a spectacle. Executions, floggings, and other brutal acts were performed in the most central, visible places in the city: the marketplace, the main square, the forum. Why? Because the goal wasn't just to punish one person, it was to send a message to everyone who watched. Every scream, every drop of blood, was a demonstration of the empire's power. It was a constant, chilling reminder. This is what happens when you defy us. The empire is always watching, and its wrath is absolute. This constant threat had a profound effect on daily life. Over time, fear sculpted the behavior of entire populations. People learned what they could and couldn't say. They learned which topics to avoid in conversation, where they shouldn't gather in groups, and how to become invisible to the authorities. Silence became a shield, a strategy for survival. You might see injustice, you might suffer under an unfair policy, but the thought of speaking out was terrifying. The risk of challenging the system felt far greater than the misery of living within it. This self-censorship was more effective than any army of spies. But fear did more than just silence people. It isolated them. It atomized society, breaking the bonds of community. When a careless word could lead to your neighbor reporting you, trust evaporates. People became suspicious of each other. Friendships grew shallow, and communities fractured. This social isolation was a brilliant strategy for maintaining control. An isolated, fearful population is honestly governed one. If people can't trust each other, they can't organize. They can't form resistance movements. Everyone is alone with their fear, making the empire's power seem even more insurmountable. Religion often played a key role in cementing this system of control. Rulers frequently claimed a divine right to rule, linking their authority directly to the gods. The emperor wasn't just a man, he was a chosen representative of a higher power. This meant that defying the emperor was like defying the gods themselves. Punishments weren't just the state's justice, they were divine retribution. This ideology taught people to accept their suffering. It wasn't the result of a tyrant's cruelty, it was fate, or the will of the gods. This belief system was incredibly effective at discouraging rebellion and encouraging a grim acceptance of even the harshest realities. From the ruler's perspective, this system worked. They believed that fear created stability, and in a way, they were right. Major rebellions were often few and far between, not because people were happy and content, but because the consequences of failure were so horrifyingly severe. The empire maintained order, trade routes were secure, and the state functioned, but this order came at a terrible price: the loss of human freedom, dignity, and potential. The dark side of this method of rule is undeniable. A society built on fear is a society it destroys creativity, because new ideas are dangerous. It erodes trust, because everyone is a potential threat. It starves compassion, because survival becomes the only goal. People are reduced from active citizens to passive survivors, their lives dictated by the need to avoid the state's anger. Ancient empires valued control above all else, and fear was the bedrock of that control. Today, we marvel at the monuments these empires left behind: the Colosseum, the Great Wall, the pyramids. We read about their epic battles and their powerful leaders, but we rarely stop to consider the emotional landscape of the people who lived under their shadow. The constant level anxiety, the weight of unspoken words, the chilling effect of public punishment. This was a daily reality for millions. This emotional cost, though not carved in stone, shaped generations. It defined what it meant to live, to survive, and to be human under the watchful eye of an empire that ruled by fear. The fourth topic of discussion is war and expansion. Have you ever looked at a map of an ancient empire, like the Roman or Persian Empire, and just marveled at its size? All those territories, all that power. It's easy to be impressed, but have you ever stopped to think about what it actually took to build something that massive? What was the real price of all that glory? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the dark side of ancient expansion. A story that's less about triumphant marches and more about the human cost of empire. For ancient rulers, expansion wasn't just a choice. It was seen as a necessity. There was this prevailing belief: an empire must either grow or die. It had to keep expanding to secure more resources, more wealth, and more power. This mindset turned war from an occasional, last resort event into a permanent state of being. It was the engine that drove the entire imperial machine. Think about it: every new piece of conquered land brought in valuable resources like grain, minerals, and timber. It also provided a new source of labor, often in the form of enslaved people. For the emperor or king back home, every victory was a powerful piece of propaganda. It solidified their image as a strong, divinely favored leader and silenced any potential rivals. A successful war was the ultimate proof of legitimacy. But let's flip the perspective. What was a glorious victory for the empire was a catastrophe for the people on the receiving end. When an army swept through a region, it wasn't just a transfer of power. It was destruction on a massive scale. Cities that had stood for generations were besieged, sacked, and sometimes burned to the ground. Entire populations were uprooted, forced to flee as refugees or captured and sold into slavery. Families were torn apart, and communities were shattered. Imagine everything you've ever known: your home, your culture, your way of life, being wiped away in a matter of days or weeks. This was the reality for countless people who stood in the path of an expanding empire. Their history, their gods, their language, all of it was suddenly under threat, often systematically suppressed to make way for the conqueror's culture. And the burden of this constant warfare wasn't just felt by the conquered. It weighed heavily on the empire's own citizens. An army doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It needs to be fed, armed, and paid. And who do you think provided all that? The civilians? Farmers were required to give up a significant portion of their harvest to feed the soldiers, sometimes leaving their own families with barely enough to survive. Craftsmen, blacksmiths, leather workers, carpenters were put to work churning out weapons, armor, and siege equipment. And of course, the armies needed soldiers. Young men were conscripted, pulled away from their farms and families, often for years at a time. Many never came back. For the families left behind, this meant not only emotional loss, but also a critical labor shortage. A missing son or husband could be the difference between a successful harvest and starvation. The very foundation of society was strained to support the relentless war machine. For those who were conquered and survived, life became a tightrope walk of forced loyalty. You were now a subject of a foreign power. You had to obey new laws, pay taxes to a distant ruler, and often adopt new customs. Resistance was always an option, but it was an incredibly dangerous one. Any sign of rebellion, no matter how small, was usually met with overwhelming and brutal force. Empires were experts at making examples out of those who dared to defy them. To maintain control, they would often impose their own language, their own religion, and their own administrative systems. This was a form of cultural warfare. Over generations, it could erode a people's sense of identity, leaving them adrift, disconnected from their own heritage. The goal wasn't just to control their bodies, but to control their minds as well. This cycle of endless war also had a profound psychological impact on everyone involved. It normalized violence. For generations of people living within these empires, conflict was not a shocking anomaly. It was simply a fact of life. Children grew up hearing stories of battle, seeing soldiers marching through their towns, and knowing that their future might be on a battlefield. This created a society where military strength was valued above all else. Diplomacy and negotiation were often seen as signs of weakness. The default solution to any problem, whether with a neighboring kingdom or a rebellious province, was force. This militaristic mindset shaped every aspect of how empires interacted with the world. It created a perpetual state of tension, where peace was just a temporary pause between wars. Ironically, the very thing that made these empires so powerful there, relentless. Expansion often planted the seeds of their own destruction. An empire can only stretch so far before it becomes impossible to manage. The larger it got, the more vulnerable its borders became. Defending thousands of miles of frontier against raids and invasions required a massive, permanent military presence, which was incredibly expensive. The constant campaigns drained the treasury and exhausted the population. At the same time, controlling a vast, diverse, an often resentful population became harder and harder. This led to even more repressive policies and a greater reliance on fear, which in turn fueled more resentment and rebellion. It was a vicious cycle. The empire was like a giant balloon being inflated the bigger it got. The thinner and more fragile its skin became, until eventually it was doomed to pop. So when we look at the magnificent ruins of ancient Rome or the incredible artifacts of the Egyptian Empire, it's important to remember the full story. The grand monuments and sprawling maps tell a story of power and achievement, but they don't show the other side of the coin. They don't show the burned villages, the displaced families, the cultures that were erased. They do one show the farmers struggling to feed their families after the tax collectors and army recruiters came through. The story of ancient expansion is a story of incredible creation. Yes, it built empires that shaped the course of human history, but it was also a story of incredible destruction. It broke societies, shattered lives, and left a legacy of suffering that is often forgotten. The glory of the empire was built on the silent sacrifice of millions. The fifth topic of discussion is slavery system. When we think of ancient empires around Greece, Egypt, what comes to mind? We picture magnificent temples, grand aqueducts, powerful armies, and brilliant philosophers. We celebrate their laws, their art, and their military genius. But beneath the glittering surface of these celebrated civilizations lies a darker, more unsettling foundation, one that is often overlooked or treated as a mere footnote in history books. I'm talking about slavery. And today, we go into pull back the curtain and explore how this brutal system was not just a part of ancient empires. It was the engine that powered them. Let us be clear. Slavery in the ancient world was not a small-scale issue hidden in the shadows. It was a massive, institutionalized system, absolutely central to the economy, society, and the very expansion of these empires. The grandeur and stability that we admire were built on the backs of millions of people who were stripped of their freedom and humanity. So, where did all these enslaved people come from? The primary source was war. As empires expanded their territories, they conquered cities and nations. They defeated populations. Men, women, and children were often captured and brought back not as citizens, but as spoils of war. These captives were systematically absorbed into the empire as a massive, unpaid labor force. Another path to slavery was debt. In many ancient societies, if a person couldn't pay what they owed, they could be forced into servitude, sometimes along with their entire family. This was known as debt bondage. And finally, people could be enslaved as a form of legal punishment for certain crimes. Regardless of how they entered it, the outcome was the same: a complete loss of freedom and personal autonomy. Enslaved individuals were legally considered property, or chattel. They could be bought, sold, inherited, or even given away as gifts. Just like a piece of furniture or a farm animal, their humanity was denied, their families were torn apart, and their identities were erased. So, what did these millions of enslaved people actually do? The short answer is everything. They were the backbone of the ancient economy. In agriculture, vast numbers of enslaved laborers worked on large estates known as latifundia in Rome, producing the grain, wine, and olive oil that fed the empire's population. This industrial-scale farming, powered by forced labor, allowed cities to grow to unprecedented sizes. Think about the food on an ancient Roman stable. Chances are it was planted, harvested, and processed by an enslaved person. They also toiled in the most dangerous and grueling jobs imaginable. They were sent into the darkness of mines to extract gold, silver, copper, and iron, the very resources that funded imperial armies and lavish lifestyles. The conditions in these mines were horrific. Life expectancy was incredibly short, with workers facing constant threats from tunnel collapses, poor ventilation, and sheer exhaustion. But to the empire, they were replaceable. When one worker died, there was always another to take their place. This highlights a chilling reality. Their value was measured solely by their productivity, not by their life. And then there's the monumental construction that still applauds us today. The Colosseum, the pyramids, the Parthenon, the vast networks of roads that connected empires. These incredible feats of engineering were not built by willing, paid workers alone. They were largely constructed through the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved populations. Imagine the sheer physical effort required to quarry massive stones, transport them for miles, and hoist them into place using only rudimentary tools. This was the work of countless unnamed individuals whose suffering literally formed the foundations of the monuments we now visit as tourists. Their exhaustion built the symbols of imperial greatness. Beyond the fields, mines, and construction sites, enslaved people were also integral to urban and domestic life. They worked in workshops, producing pottery, textiles, and other goods. In the homes of the wealthy, they were servants, cooks, cleaners, and tutors for the children. Some, who were educated, might serve as scribes, accountants, or doctors. But even in these seemingly less brutal roles, their status was unchanged. They lived at the complete mercy of their owners, subject to physical abuse and with no control over their own bodies or futures. You might be wondering, how could a system so cruel be so widely accepted? The answer is that it was deeply normalized through law, tradition, and even philosophy. Legal codes across ancient empires explicitly defined the status of enslaved people as property. Philosophers like Aristotle famously argued that some people were slaves by nature, rationalizing the institution as a natural and necessary part of the social order. These ideas permeated society, creating a powerful ideology that stripped the system of any moral questions for those who benefited from it. It was simply the way things were. This cultural acceptance made the machine of slavery run smoothly, without friction or widespread moral outrage from the free population. The psychological impact of this system was devastating. Imagine living a life where you have no control over your destiny. You could be sold at any moment, separating you from your spouse, your children, and everyone you've ever known. Your name could be changed, your cultural heritage erased, and your identity systematically dismantled. Life was a constant state of uncertainty and fear. Resistance was incredibly risky, often met with brutal punishment. Yet it happened. From small acts of defiance to large-scale revolts, like the famous uprising led by Spartacus, enslaved people fought back for their freedom, reminding us that the human spirit can never be entirely extinguished. The existence of slavery also had a profound effect on the free citizens of these empires. It's fundamentally devalued the concept of labor. Why would a free citizen work for low wages in a field or a mine when an owner could force an enslaved person to do it for free? This created huge economic disparities and concentrated wealth in the hands of a small elite who owned land and people. It created a society rigidly divided between a small group with immense power and a vast population both enslaved and free with very little. The entire social structure was built on this profound inequality. What a person's worth was determined not by their character or skills, but by their legal status as free or enslaved. So, when we look back at the achievements of ancient empires, it's crucial that we see the full picture. The stability, the wealth, the architectural wonders, and the military might were not achieved in a vacuum. They were inextricably linked to a system of mass exploitation. The success of these empires depended directly on their ability to minimize the cost of labor to zero through brutal force. The dark side of this history isn't just about the cruelty inflicted upon individuals. It's about how deeply this cruelty was woven into the very fabric of imperial success. To praise the accomplishments of ancient empires without acknowledging the foundation of slavery on which they stood is to tell only half the story. In reality, slavery wasn't a footnote. It was a central pillar. The greatness of empire was built on the lives and suffering of millions of people whose names have been lost to history, but whose forced labor made it all possible. Understanding this doesn't diminish the need to study the past, but it calls for a more honest and complete perspective, one that recognizes both the light and the immense darkness that coexisted in the ancient world. The sixth topic of discussion is the real costs. Ancient empires, the names echo through history. Rome, Persia, Egypt, the Han Dynasty. We see their legacies everywhere. In the towering monuments that defy time, the intricate legal codes that still influence our laws, and the epic stories of conquest that fill our history books. These achievements are undeniably impressive. They shaped the world we live in today and set the stage for future civilizations. But beneath this glittering surface of grandeur lies a much darker, often overlooked truth. The real, staggering cost of empire was human suffering. Let's be clear. Empires didn't just spring into existence through brilliant innovation and peaceful progress. Their foundations were built on systems that consistently prioritized power over people. Absolute authority was concentrated in the hands of a few, while fear was the primary tool for maintaining control. Constant warfare was not an occasional event, but the very engine of expansion. And exploitation was the economic model that fueled it all. This system created a fragile stability for the rulers, but for the vast majority, it meant a life of hardship and uncertainty. This fundamental imbalance wasn't a side effect of empire. It was its core operating principle. Think about the history you were taught. We remember the names of emperors, the brilliant military strategies of generals, and the long lines of dynasties. But what about the names we don't know? What about the farmer whose land was seized to feed a marching army? What about the families torn apart by war? their sons conscripted, and their homes destroyed? What about the countless laborers who spent their entire lives building magnificent temples and tombs they would never be allowed to enter or enjoy? A profound silence surrounds these lives, and it's not because their stories were insignificant, but because they lacked the power to have them recorded. Their voices were erased by the very system that exploited them. Facing this dark side of ancient empires forces us to ask some uncomfortable questions about what we consider greatness. Can an empire truly be called great if its splendor was built on a foundation of mass inequality? Can we celebrate its progress without acknowledging the immense human cost that paid for it? These questions can feel unsettling, and perhaps that's why they are so often ignored in popular history, which prefers to focus on the triumphs rather than the tragedies. But understanding this harsh reality doesn't mean we should reject or cancel ancient history. It means we have to see it in its entirety, with all its complexities and contradictions. The ancient empires did achieve remarkable feats of engineering, art, and governance. That is a fact. But it is also a fact that they created deep, widespread, and systemic suffering. Both of these truths can and must exist together. Acknowledging the pain doesn't diminish the achievements. It places them in their proper human context. By examining this darker side, we learn lessons that are just as important as any battle strategy or architectural technique. We learn that power without limits, without checks and balances, inevitably leads to abuse. We learn that while fear can create a semblance of order, it does so by destroying trust and corroding the human spirit. And we learn that while exploitation might build immense wealth for a select few, it leaves behind lasting scars of social and economic damage that can linger for generations. These aren't just dusty old lessons confined to the past. They resonate powerfully in our world today. They remind us that any society, ancient or modern, must be judged not just by what it builds, but by how it treats its people, especially the most vulnerable. This is how history becomes truly meaningful. It shouldn't just be about blind admiration for the powerful. It should be a tool for learning responsibility and cultivating empathy. The ancient empires undoubtedly shaped our world, leaving a legacy that is both awe-inspiring and deeply cautionary. When we look back at their great monuments and sprawling territories, we must also remember the true cause. It wasn't measured in gold, or land, or resources. It was measured in human lives, in lost dignity, and in suppressed freedom. And that is the side of history we must never, ever forget. Thank you for watching. If this video gave you a new perspective on history, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel for more content that looks beyond the headlines of the past. See you next time.